Well, it's been a rough ride for air travelers here in Canada, too. After massive disruptions over the holidays, Canada's Transport Minister is urging airlines to prioritize passenger rights.
Is this an opportunity for us to take a look at our rules and our system, to make them stronger, to make them clearer, to make them more efficient? Absolutely, that's my commitment to Canadians. But again, it's not just the rules, is we need airlines to ensure that they make good decisions to keep passengers' rights at the center of their operation.
Now, the minister is set to appear before the House Transport Committee tomorrow. That committee will also hear from the airlines that left some Canadians in the lurch. Jeff Morrison is president and CEO of the National Airlines Council of Canada. I spoke to him earlier. First, Canadians had a rough go in the summer when it came to air travel. Now, many have had a difficult holiday travel season. What do you say to Canadians who are asking, how did this happen again?
Yeah, and what I'll first of all say is to any passenger that was impacted by these holiday disruptions, there's all kinds of empathy. I know it's happened to me several times in the past. It's difficult, it's frustrating. It's also as equally disruptive and frustrating to the airlines, I might add. Nobody wants to see these kinds of disruptions ever happen. I think what we experienced this holiday season was really a once in a generation, I would argue once in a lifetime weather event that happened on the West Coast, happened in central Canada, happened in the United States, which is why we also saw travel disruptions in the US. It happened over several days, and it happened right at the busiest travel period of the year. So frankly, you could not have scripted this in a worse way. And as a result of that, there were so many impacts faced by the entire aviation ecosystem that we saw the disruptions that we did.
I have interviewed Minister Omar Gabra about this, and he acknowledges that the weather was a factor, but he also says that there were bad decisions made by notably Sunwing, who I know isn't a member of your council. But do you accept that it is not just exceptionally bad winter weather that played a role, but also decisions that airlines made?
Well, because of these, again, once in a lifetime weather experiences that we faced throughout the country and over several days, there was clearly some downstream effects that happened. So obviously the immediate cancellations that had to happen. And it's really important to emphasize that those decisions were never made lightly. Safety for airlines and the entire aviation ecosystem is paramount. It is something that will not be compromised. I've heard some commentators suggest weather and safety is like a scapegoat that airlines use. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually very irresponsible to suggest otherwise. So clearly those safety-related decisions were difficult, but they did have downstream effects. So, it's normal on any given day to have contingency planning for airlines and for other actors in the aviation ecosystem, whether it be pilots unavailable or flight attendants or aircraft unavailable. That's regular. This was a unique experience that really taxed the system in every way, such that all the various contingency plans that are normally in place couldn't be activated because, of course, contingency options are not limitless. So this really was a once in a lifetime unique experience mitigated by weather. But, having said that, there are clearly lessons that will be learned from this. And I hope that at the committee on Thursday that the various witnesses will share some of those suggestions.
I hear you saying bad things happened. I hear you saying lessons to be learned. What does the airline industry need to take responsibility for in all of this?
So I think one of the things that airlines have done is obviously work very closely with passengers to try and mitigate their particular situations, make sure that when this was happening, they could get to where they needed to go. No question, that was difficult given some of the weather events that were happening, given some of the capacity constraints, both with respect to labor and equipment that were happening. Since then, and since things have somewhat settled down, airlines are continuing to work with passengers to make sure that their obligations under the air passenger protection rights are adhered to, and that when there are disputes, that airlines are working very closely with the Canadian Transportation Agency to resolve those complaints.
I'd love to talk to you about that. Again, I think folks are really going to be listening when you say that this, was a once-in-a-lifetime weather event. There were already 33,000 complaints before the Canadian Transportation Agency. Doesn't that suggest, That's a stunning number. Doesn't that suggest that there is a bigger problem in the industry? I appreciate that there's a backlog at the agency, but doesn't that suggest another problem?
Yeah, so no question, there is a backlog at the CTA right now. That has been predominantly due to the summer events that we saw, which was in and of itself another unique, what we hope, once in a lifetime experience, whereby travel restrictions that were lifted in the spring of 2022 resulted in a massive, massive increase in travel demand, about a 300% increase in travel demand within a very short period of time, which taxed every aspect of the aviation ecosystem: airlines, airports, navigation, security, customs, and so forth. So a lot of those complaints that are currently being addressed by the CTA and why we have that backlog dates back to that. And don't forget, the APPR and the CTA dispute resolution system, it wasn't set up for a pandemic.
Okay.
So that's why we're still facing this backlog today.
So I spoke to Minister Alghabra on CBC Radio's The House, and he said that they are looking at changing the system to put more of the onus on airlines to refund people, so they don't have to get to the regulator to resolve their disputes. Is that something the airline would welcome? Greater onus or greater clarity around the fact that the onus is on the airline rather than, he says, passengers who feel like it's on their own shoulders right now?
So, in fact, in September of 2022, those regulations were amended so that there's actually already additional onus that has been put on the airlines. So right now, as of those new regulations in September, airlines are responsible for addressing any disruption, whether it was in the control of the airlines or not. So that's put additional pressure on the airlines. The problem with those regulations, though, is that it's just that. It puts the entire onus of responsibility on strictly one party in a much more complex ecosystem.
Well, that's not what the minister says, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the minister says right now that passengers feel like the onus is on them, and he is preparing to put more onus on the airlines. I hear you saying it's not going to work for the folks you represent.
Well, so what we've suggested, and I've said this directly to the minister at an aviation summit that he held in November, is that the best air passenger protection regime is one in which you have a system in which passengers are not disrupted or the disruptions are minimized in the first place, so that they don't have to go through any sort of process whatsoever. The only way we can do that, in other words, the only way we can create a better system overall that minimizes disruptions, is if we put in place greater accountabilities, greater service standards for each entity within the air travel ecosystem. Right now, it's just the airlines that are subject to any sort of accountability, any sort of responsibility. What we want to do is broaden that out so that, in fact, we can minimize disruptions so that, frankly, passengers can get to where they want to go, which is by far the best approach.
So you say everybody needs more accountability, but I guess in closing, I would ask you, for folks who couldn't get a hold of their airline, for folks who lost their baggage for days, if not weeks, is the airline industry ready to take on more accountability after what we just saw?
You know, I think airlines have been very accountable. They have been adhering to their APPR regulations. In fact, of those various claims that go to the CTA, approximately 97% actually get resolved amicably between the airline and the passenger.
Can take up to 18 months right now, though, to do that.
No question. It is taking much longer than anticipated. There is a backlog. I know sometimes people roll their eyes when I say this, but patience is something that is being asked for, because again, we faced two very unique circumstances in 2022. I think we're all crossing our fingers that neither of those happens again, certainly not a pandemic. So it'll take a bit of time to work itself out. But I can say that airlines are adhering to their responsibilities. The CTA has acknowledged that. But let's create a better system overall so that, frankly, passengers don't have to go through a system in the first place and can get to where they want to go.
That last part, Jeff Morrison, I'm sure you will have agreement on, that everybody wants to be sure they can get where they want to go. Listen, I appreciate you making time for us today. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.